with your name, spelling, and title.
Harriet Hageman, Harriet Hageman. And my title would just be, I'm a water and natural resource and constitutional attorney, and I'm running for Congress.
Okay, perfect. And we are recording. Fantastic. All right. So what do you feel are the most important issues for Wyomingites?
As I've been traveling the state, there are three issues that have risen to the top. One of them is clearly inflation. What is happening in terms of gas prices and food prices, travel costs, everything that is affecting the kitchen table type issues has increased in price dramatically under the current administration. So inflation is one of the most important issues that people have addressed with me and what we need to do to address it. Obviously, one of the solutions to that is that we need to be producing more energy domestically. Wyoming has one of the largest coal reserves in the United States, the largest coal reserve. We're the largest coal producer. We also have the oil and gas resources here in Wyoming, and we ought to be producing energy right here in Wyoming for the benefit of the rest of the country. Another issue that keeps rising to the top, clearly, is the protection of our jobs in those industries, oil and gas, coal, those sorts of things. People are terribly concerned with the Biden administration's war on fossil fuels. And so everywhere I go, again, whether it is in Sheridan or it is Gillette, Newcastle, Pinedale, Encampment, Lincoln County, Torrington, it doesn't matter where it is. It's one of the most important issues because obviously those are the jobs that are so important to the state of Wyoming. And then finally, the third issue that we hear an awful lot about is what is going on in terms of the open border. Not only do we have the issue with massive amounts of illegal aliens pouring across our border, but the amount of drugs that are coming across the border. I was just reading some of the statistics today, and hundreds of thousands of people that they refer to as getaways. In other words, people that they're having absolutely no contact with whatsoever. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're bringing into our country. They don't know what kind of criminal histories they may have. They don't know even what countries they're coming from. We do know that we have over 180 countries of people represented that are coming across that southern border illegally. And that is of grave concern, especially in a state like Wyoming. We only have 580,000 people in the state of Wyoming. The number of illegal aliens coming across that border this year is going to more than double the population of the state of Wyoming. You can imagine what that's going to do to Wyoming, to our schools as people start making their way north. And then obviously we know that there's the issue with fentanyl. And in the last year, we've lost over 100,000 people to fentanyl overdoses. I believe that we've got a soft war going with China in terms of that's where the manufacturing of much of the fentanyl is. And they're pouring that across our border and they're killing our citizens. And it really, truly is a tragedy.
Do you believe that we should help our mineral industry? And if so, what would you do to help the oil and gas and mineral sector within Wyoming?
Well, absolutely, I do. And it's just getting the federal government out of the way. Just 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration did what I refer to as yet another sue and settle lawsuit in late June, another sue and settle lawsuit where the environmental group sued, challenging 2,000 leases in Wyoming alone that had previously been approved. They've already gone through the entire environmental review process. They were properly approved pursuant to our laws. And then the environmental group sued, and the Biden administration settled with those environmental groups and withdrew those 2,000 leases. So very simply, this isn't rocket science. This isn't difficult. Really what we need to do is we need to be producing domestically. We know how to do it safely. We know how to do it in an environmentally protected manner. We've been doing it for a long, long time and protecting our environment. In fact, producing domestic energy is better for the environment because our energy is cleaner. And we do have the mechanisms in place to make sure that we're protecting our air quality and our water quality and our land quality. Fracking has been an absolute boon to the production of natural gas in the United States. Again, coal is affordable. It is accessible. It's environmentally sound. And so we should be supporting our mineral industries. We need to get the federal government out of the way so that we can do so.
Do you think we should start focusing on diversifying Wyoming's economy? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, I think we've been talking about diversification of the Wyoming economy for decades. And I think that there are a variety of ways to do that. And I think that we are doing those things. I think tourism is obviously very important to the state of Wyoming. We love it when people come and visit our state. I think that there are the opportunity to bring in other industries right here in Laramie County. We have brought in Microsoft, and we have brought in because of I-80 and the I-25 corridors, we have brought in the warehousing for Walmart, that sort of thing, the distribution centers. So we have been diversifying our economy in that way. But one of the things that I'm always a little bit skeptical about when people talk about diversifying our economy is I don't believe that that's a top-down approach. I don't think that's for the government to do. I think that what we need to do is we need to have a business climate so that Wyoming is a very, what do I want to say, a very a good place to bring your business, and that we've got the skilled workforce here. We have the transportation, as I said, the I-80 corridor, the I-25 corridor, those sorts of things. So the fact is that we have the amenities and the resources for that, but what we have to do is make sure that we have a business climate that allows these businesses to come in, that we're not over-regulating, that we're not trying to prevent the diversification of our economy simply by over-regulating what people can do here.
All right, personally, what would you do? What will you work to do in Washington?
Well, there are several priorities that I have, and many of them relate to the issues that are the most important to the state of Wyoming. For example, as I was talking about domestically produced energy, I believe that our federal government, to the extent that they use energy, which they do, clearly, especially within our Department of Defense, the Department of Defense accounts for 75% of the energy used for the federal government. I believe that it ought to be mandatory that the federal government use domestically produced energy. That's one of the things that is a priority to me. Another one is that I do not believe that the federal government ought to be expanding its footprint, its physical footprint in the state of Wyoming. The federal government owns 48% of Wyoming's surface estate and 65% of our mineral estate. I would like to introduce a bill of no net gain in terms of federal ownership of land in the state of Wyoming. We don't need the federal government to be purchasing any more property within the state of Wyoming. Those are two of my priorities. And a third priority that I have, because of the work that I've been doing for decades now, relates to regulatory reform and trying to rein in the unlawful administrative state. So I actually work for a nonprofit law firm right now and have for the last 3 years, where our sole purpose is to try to stop unlawful administrative power. And one of the ways to do that is through transparency. What a lot of these agencies do is they issue things like guidance documents or fact sheets or answers to frequently asked questions, and then they attempt to regulate our community, our business community. An example is the EPA defining irrigation ditches as navigable waters of the United States. Clearly, Congress did not define irrigation ditches as navigable waters of the United States, but through a variety of guidance documents, the EPA has attempted to do that. And then when they do that, then they go out and they try to regulate our farmers and prosecute our farmers for doing regular and normal maintenance operations on their irrigation facilities. Another example is the USDA issuing RFID mandates just through a 2-page guidance document that they posted to their website. I want to statutorily prohibit these agencies from being able to do that and force them to the extent that they have any kind of guidance documents, that it's very, very clear that they have no force and effect of law. And the other thing is that they're required to disclose those. President Trump in October of 2019 issued 2 executive orders on this very topic. I would like to take those executive orders and turn them into statutory provisions, because one of the very first things that Joe Biden did when he came into office in January of 2021 was he repealed those 2 executive orders. That's how important they were for transparency and accountability of these agencies. So I want to make sure that we are following the Administrative Procedure Act, and I want to prohibit these agencies from legislating. really my highest priority is to force Congress to actually do its job and legislate rather than allowing the unelected bureaucrats and the executive agencies to do so. Congress needs to take its rightful place back of doing the legislating in this country. We are a republic, we're a constitutional republic, meaning we have a representative form of government. And that is not what they've been following, especially over the last 30 to 40 years. I'd like to get us back to regular order and make sure that Congress is doing its job.
All right. Post-pandemic, what would you do? What would you push to help Wyoming's economy? What would you do to push to help Wyoming's economy and inflation?
Well, it's not just post-pandemic, really. It is in terms of dealing with inflation. Again, it comes back to failed energy policy. I'm just going to repeat that over and over again, because when you increase the cost of energy, when you increase the cost of oil and gas, you're increasing the cost of transportation, you're increasing the cost of manufacturing, you're increasing the cost of food, you're increasing the cost of housing. Every single thing that the Biden administration has been to increase the cost of every good and service that we use in the United States of America. So it isn't by a mistake, and it's not just a byproduct of some of their policies. Their policies have intentionally increased the cost of food, housing, and energy. And those three things are the foundation to the prosperity in this country. We have to have affordable food, energy, and housing. This administration has destroyed that. And so what you have to do is look at the underlying policy. For inflation, we've got to be producing more domestic energy. We've got to be producing more oil and gas. We've got to be producing more coal. We need to be building more facilities that use those energy resources, not trying to mothball them. So that's number one. And then the other thing that I'm always going to come back to as a conservative is you need to get government out of the way. The pandemic the problems with the pandemic were exacerbated because of the government's reaction to the pandemic. The pandemic, we now know, was not nearly as serious as the government wants all of us to believe. In fact, the CDC, as we speak, is revising their numbers downward. And I think we're going to, over time, see those numbers revised downward time and time and time again in terms of the number of people who actually passed away because of COVID-19. So what happened is that the pandemic was bad, and China needs to be held accountable for that. We need to be investigating, find out what happened with the Wuhan lab, find out to what extent Fauci was funding the Wuhan lab or gain of function research. We need to get to the bottom of all of that. But in terms of the pandemic, it was the government's response to the pandemic that destroyed things, whether it was lockdowns or it was mandates or it was prohibitions. You look at what some of the governors and around this country did, and you look at what Biden did since he's been in office with the vaccine mandates. The reason we've got chaos in the skies right now with our airlines and with air travel is because of the vaccine mandates, against our pilots that are being used against our pilots. So the Biden vaccine mandates have been absolutely disastrous for this country. But the governors who locked down their states, who determined which businesses were essential and which were not, it wasn't for the government to decide that. It wasn't for governors or health officials to decide that. It was really an incredibly blatant violation of our constitutional foundation, our constitutional norms, our freedoms, our liberties, and we've all suffered the consequences of it. And then in addition to which, you've got the government that has just been printing money like a bunch of, I don't know, I don't even know what to describe them. I don't even know if there's anything to compare it to. The massive amounts of printing of money that has gone on to ostensibly address the response to the pandemic is another reason for the horrific inflation that we're seeing. And by the way, inflation is not at 8.6% as our federal government would have us believe. It's much, much, much higher than that. And it is in part because the federal government just has printed, or the Federal Reserve has printed massive amounts of money to attempt to address the disaster that they created by their pandemic response. And it really goes back to what I often say, which is that government is always trying to fix its last solution. And that's the situation we're in. Government is trying to fix its last solution. They created a disaster with the pandemic. They followed up with a disastrous monetary policy. They followed up with a disastrous energy policy, and they have just piled bad policy on top of bad policy on top of bad policy. And that's why we have the problems that we do in this country. It's not because of the individuals, it's that the government has failed.
How do you plan to fund education in Wyoming in the future?
Well, I'm running for federal office.
Right.
So I'm running for Congress. I'm not running for the state legislature or for governor.
Okay.
And
We'll just move to the next question then.
okay.
Is it more important to follow party leadership or the Constitution?
I don't think that there's a conflict between the two. I think that there has been a lot of gnashing of teeth and people who want to pretend that there is a difference between the two, but there is not. And the reason that I say that is if you look at the Republican platform, it follows the Constitution very, very closely. There isn't a conflict between what I believe as a Republican and what I believe as a constitutional attorney. As I've often said, I'm actually a constitutional attorney. I don't just play one on TV. I've studied that document extensively. It's what I do for a living, is ensuring that we're protecting the constitutional rights of our individuals. And so when you look at what the party platform is and what our political leaders, what our party leaders in Wyoming have done, they're following the Constitution. It's based upon freedom. It's based upon individuals. It's based upon individual liberty. It's based upon limited government. It's based upon being private property rights. It's based upon autonomy. It's based upon personal responsibility. It's based upon everything that is really directly tied to the Constitution and especially our Bill of Rights. So I don't see that there's a conflict between following the Republican platform and also adhering to and following and furthering our Constitution.
Alrighty. Is there anything you'd like Wyomingites to know about you and your platforms?
Well, you can go to hagemanforwyoming.com and you will find a lot more information about me, about my platform, about the work I've done, about my writings, articles, interviews. There is just a wealth of information at hagemanforwyoming.com, and I encourage everyone to go to that resource. As far as learning more about me, I have been traveling the state. I've now traveled almost 31,000 miles around the state of Wyoming since I announced that I was running. And I assume we'll probably hit another 15 to 20,000 in the next 40 days before the primary. I have been meeting with thousands upon thousands of people across this great state and talking to them about the issues that are important to them, addressing their concerns, talking about what I can do in Congress and what we need to do in terms of bringing power back to the states. You briefly raised the issue of education. I don't believe that that's a federal issue. That is a state issue. I believe very strongly that our states are the ones that should be leading and furthering the agenda of the folks that live right here in Wyoming in terms of our educational curriculum and things like that. I have been listening. I have been talking to people, as I've said. I have been in almost every single community around the state at least once, and many of them multiple times. It has been an incredible experience, and one that I will say that people are very excited to take their country back. People truly are fed up with the Biden administration. We're fed up with what's going on nationally. We want to take our country back. We want to return to our constitutional foundation and the ideas and ideals of freedom and liberty, parental responsibility, and all of the things that we've talked about in this interview. So it's been an honor to be able to travel the state and talk with people, but really it has just been, I've learned a lot, and I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to talk to people. I'm willing to meet with people under any circumstance so that we're able to get our country back, as I said.